So I recently got back into youth coaching, like really young. I've got a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and I can honestly say I'm not sure if I have done much to build the culture other than just show up every session with enthusiasm and positivity. I mean, when you're coaching 5 and 6-year-olds for 1 hour a week, I mean, what can you do? You don't have the time, they don't have the attention span or the maturity. But I think that mindset that I've held for so long is actually wrong. And today's conversation with Clint Halladay challenged me on that. Now, Clint, who is our guest in the podcast today, is going to share how he's been intentional in building relationships and creating an incredibly positive culture at the youth level. Now, regardless of your level of coaching, I know you're going to get a lot out of today's episode, just like in last week's episode where he talked about his work as CEO of the company SewLong. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help coaches and leaders build better cultures and become better people so they can become better leaders. If you want to learn more about our one-on-one coaching program, workshops, online courses, be sure to check us out at tocculture.com. There you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter to get the notes to this and every episode. So Clint, I want to move into the second part of our conversation around your experience as a youth soccer coach. Like many youth coaches out there, you took on the job to coach your son, but coaching has become something bigger for you. You no longer coach your son's team, but you're just as invested and committed as a coach. So why have you stuck with coaching?
Yeah, I think I wanted to coach because I wanted to be in control. Now I coach because I can see how I can have an impact on the community.
Unpack that more, though. You
And I've,
want to have control?
yeah, I started at a really young age. I had a really bad coach from my perspective, but from probably other parents' perspective, he was awesome because we won the state championship. But I was 9 at the time, and I didn't play a single play in the last 2 games of the season, which seems a little ridiculous for 9-year-olds. So I wanted to be in control, right? I wanted to be able to say who could play and who didn't, and be ethically better, I guess, because I wanted to make sure everyone got equal playing time. And I think that had an impact once I started coaching, because I had this idea of how I could have an impact on these kids' lives and affect their future sporting career. Once I got here, again, through your help, I clarified why I wanted to coach. And even at one point, if I wanted to continue coaching, because I did run into some struggles with that, ultimately decided to keep coaching because I saw that I could have an impact.
And now you've kind of had this second wind in coaching. You've really kind of repurposed yourself, become really super intentional, and because you're in an environment where I think it's being really, really well received. So talk about some of the practical ways that you're building culture at such a young age group, because I know this is something I struggle at when I'm even coaching my son and daughter, who are now 5 and 6 years old, is that I really find it difficult to do anything that's cultural or about connections. And it's just like, because so often you're just like herding sheep, or herding cats is, I think that's the phrase. Herding sheep's easier than herding cats, but whatever it is, you're out there, you're working with them, and it's really, really, challenging just to get them to pay attention. So what are some ways that you've been able to build culture within the team?
I had to decide what kind of coach I wanted to be. I think that was important to realize who's in front of me. They're little kids, and did I want to be the authoritarian person that told them they had to stand in line all the time, or did I want to give them space to allow them to discover what I was trying to achieve? I think I'm kind of in the middle. There's times where I need them to stand shoulder to shoulder and listen to me, and there's times where I allow them to recognize for me to pay attention. But anyways, I hear all these amazing ideas on your podcast and your books, and I really want to go back and implement these things. And then I immediately understand that it's not age appropriate because they're not going to fully understand it. So I try to figure out how I simplify them. So one of the things that I like to do, one of the things that I enjoy that I've done that I think has had a kind of a big impact is shout outs at the end of practice. And I'm dealing with 7-year-olds, so I coach U8s. And the first 6 to 8 practices we have after practice, and I give these kids an idea of a shout out where they have to say, I shout out James for hustling. is a totally foreign concept to them, and they don't understand why they're recognizing someone else. And maybe one or two kids will do it, to a point now where if I feel rushed after a game to let the kids go because their parents are waiting for them, they are demand to do shout outs. We have to do shout outs, coach. Um, so it went from a kind of an awkward thing to a pretty common thing where they're recognizing each other. And now that we've been doing them for 6 months with the current group I have, like they're pretty specific on what they're noticing other kids do. Hey, I noticed this pass he did. And so that's super awesome. Another thing is that I wanted to give them, like, how can I give these 7-year-olds the opportunity to be leaders? Because leadership is important to me. So how do I foster that? And I came up with this idea of leader of the day for practice. And I came up with 3 really easy rules that these leaders can do. They're the only ones required to have a shout out after practice. They have to give out lots of high fives and knucks throughout the practice, and they get the opportunity to call everybody in when it's time for a huddle, and even I have to run to them with the intent of trying to show them that we run when we hustle in. So now that they every practice they're like, I know, because I share with the parents who's the leaders for every week, and they come ready, know who's the leader, what their responsibilities are. And this has led to high fives during the games. They chase each other around now when they're subbing in and out if someone didn't get a high five. And it's like totally stopping the game. And I just sit there and love it because I'm like, yes, my team wants to give high five. None of the other teams are. Um, it's those are 2 of the big things that I do, that have an impact on the kids.
Clint, one of the things that I think is challenging about coaching younger kids. So, I were talking a little bit before. My daughter's 8. We've started her in 3rd grade basketball. I'm the lead coach for that team while I'm also coaching the varsity team, at school. So there's a lot on my plate as far as that goes. But one of the things that's been challenging for me, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, is my definition for what success looks like at the varsity level is very different than what success looks like with our 8-year-olds. And I wonder if you've dug into that question a little bit, as you've taken on your own team and you think about the season, even thinking about individual practice. How do you define success when you're working with kids of that age?
I think the kids being friends is kind of what I need to define as success. And seeing how they have grown as friends and how we have solved some of the problems of kids not getting along and maybe acting out with each other and stuff like that, and how addressing that and helping these players understand and actually learn how to communicate a little bit better has been how I define success at this age. And along with that, I mean, we've had a fairly successful, they don't keep score at this age, like officially. And however, if you promise not to tell my kids, the team, I keep score, but I tell them I don't. So don't spill those beans. We've had a pretty successful season. They've done really well. They play pretty well as a team, and they truly have a blast. And they're getting better at soccer, which I think is ultimately the goal for most of the parents.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's the thing. I mean, I joke again, we're 3rd grade and we're just introducing basketball. And I think if this thing looks kind of like basketball when we're done in February, then I'll feel like a state championship coach, considering where we're at right now. Right? But I mean, do they want to come back and play? Yeah. They look forward to coming to practice. And does it start to look more like the game it's supposed to? I think all those things are, success criteria in and of themselves, at that age group. I got another follow-up question for you here, because as JP mentioned, you started coaching your son's team. And for those that have coached, a lot of us and in the audience and coaches in the community here, we've coached our own kids. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a minefield, in terms of, just had a conversation with my wife last night because she's helping coach this 3rd grade group, and she's struggling to communicate with our 8-year-old during practice, and some of the same patterns that they have in the living room and the kitchen, rear their ugly head in practice. And so we're trying to figure out how to navigate that as well. But how did you sort of approach, being coach and being dad with your son?
Poorly. I tried to separate the 2, and I tried to have that conversation with him that here I'm coach and here I'm dad. However, I as the, like, towards the end of the time that I was his coach, I became vastly more aware that I had way higher expectations of him than I had of anybody else. Uh, and I finally started to get better at that right towards the end of being his coach. And so, yeah, it's challenging because I think some parent coaches are either really hard on their kid or they're maybe too soft on their kid and think their kids are better than they are. I don't honestly know, but I know that I was way too hard on my son, and I had really high expectations of him, and I would get frustrated when he would do something, but I wouldn't bother me when another kid would do it. Uh, and it took a lot of self reflection to get to a point where I actually noticed that.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that kind of leads into this other aspect I wanted to talk about, which was just relationships with players. I think it's really difficult, for adults to build relationships, oftentimes the more years between, the coach and the player. And also in this environment, you're not really doing a lot as a team outside of the practices or games. Whereas in the high school and the collegiate level and the pro level, there's a lot of downtime to build relationships, to get to know kids. How have you approached relationships with your players, and how have you tried to invest and get to know them as people, not just the athlete?
I make it a point to greet every kid that shows up. We get knucks or high fives with every kid that shows up. Every now and then I miss a kid that shows up late and just jumps into whatever we're doing, but I try to connect with all of them. One of the silly questions that I always ask, that every time I ask, I'm like, man, I need to come up with different questions, is what did they learn at school today? And then when they always tell me they didn't, I always kind of press a little bit more. But I try to get to see what their day was like, what they do, what they do today was fun. Um, I've stayed after practice before and played Cinco Linko with a player. I got that game from Al, who's one of the members here. He turned me onto that game, so it's a quick and easy game to play. That I felt like I needed. I needed to connect with this player, primarily just because we had to go through some corrections with him. So I wanted to make sure that he knew that, yes, I had these expectations of him and I still cared about him. So we played Cinco Linko after practice one day. I've played cards with kids after practice, kind of a similar thing. Another player, I felt like we weren't connecting. And so I asked his mom, I knew that he liked board games. So I asked his mom to bring his favorite board game. And I actually played the board game with him and his mom after. No, that one was before practice, but similar situation. And then again, I think the high fives and the shout outs, and I don't do the circles as much as I would like, because when we're indoors, I don't need them sitting on the AstroTurf and getting even more covered in black rubber than they already are. So when we're outside, we do it, but when we're indoors, I usually skip it. But they sit down and share 3 gratitudes when we do that.
Yeah, and that's just them sitting in a circle and just getting them to share and connect, which comes back to that whole thing around building relationships within the team. You mentioned there are some corrections. I think you've been exceptional at this, dealing with behavioral issues. And this obviously is working with younger people, but it's also works with older players, as we've learned as well, too. What are some of the behavioral issues that you've had to address, within your team, and maybe share, a couple of unique stories around how you've been able to work through those with some players.
I think at this age, the most common one is focus and paying attention. However, I did have a kid that was he wasn't. I guess he was intentionally stepping on kids' toes, like intentionally tripping people when we were playing, spraying him with his water bottle, just some poor behavior. And then he was always right there with the kid when the kid was coming to tell me that this bad thing just happened. Uh, and we had a scrimmage where I called all the kids in, and there was an incident when I called them all in that I'm like, all right, I guess I have to address this. So I reached out to the parents, and I first had a conversation with the parents about what I was seeing. And it was probably one of the scariest conversations I've ever had with a parent, because I didn't know how they were going to receive it. I was fortunate enough to have the parents say, "Oh, I'm so grateful you reached out, because we noticed it too, and we were about to reach out to you." So I was fortunate in that respect. And then with that player, I let him know that I was aware of what was going on. And I asked him if he was doing it to get my attention. And he smiled and said no. So I therefore knew that's kind of what he was after. So we talked about ways that he can get my attention. So now he's in charge of collecting all the balls when they get crazy for us, and he's got to bring them back in and get them in the room. He gave me a hand signal that he wanted me to use. I've used touching my nose with kids. This kid wanted me to point at my eyes to remind him that I see what he's doing and it's not agreed upon. And quite honestly, I've been waiting for another follow-up on this where I was going to have to correct him again. And I haven't had one yet, but I know it's going to come. But it's been like 3 months and the kid has been awesome. He's engaged in soccer practice. He still collects all the balls for me. It's still his job. So yeah, that was the most recent one.
No, I love that because, those agreed upon interventions are really, really powerful. But what's probably most powerful is that conversation before the conversation. And here you're playing board games with kids, you're engaging the parents. And that kind of leads us up to kind of just some of the things we want to finish up here with you on, which is you got an email from a parent. Well, your club director got an email from a parent. And that is typically something that, a coach hears that and their ears go up and like they're on high alert, like, oh my gosh, a parent email. But this one was, a parent that was commending you for an amazing job that you're doing as a coach. And they actually bolded out the many of your great qualities as a coach. And one of those was communication. And then there was, how you approachable you are with parents. And just kind of curious if you could elaborate how you've tried to be more approachable with parents and kind of, keep them in the loop and communicate.
So my son plays. He has aspirations of being in the World Cup in 2030, I think is what he told me last night. Or 2028 or whenever the second one away is. And so as a sporting parent, I try to answer all the questions I have for his coach. And I do that in a weekly email. It is, quite honestly, for a youth coach, it is time consuming. However, I know that these parents, I know that the culture that we're in this competitive soccer world is these parents are very involved. They want to know what's going on as I do. So I take the time to write a pretty detailed email of everything that's going on this week, and next week is kind of the most important thing. Like the schedule, I think, is what I get the most value out of. But I also share with them kind of what we're working on in practice, what I hope to achieve as far as like tactics and things go. I talk about, I explain to them why I care about the kids being grateful after games and after practice, why I want them to do shout outs. And I try to communicate as much as I can. When I read that I was approachable in that email, honestly, the first thing I thought is I could be a lot better. I don't know that I'm as good as I would like to be in that area. But it is something that I'm aware of, that I want to be genuine with parents, because my experience with some coaches in the past is it does feel like they're a little guarded. They keep you at arm's length. So I want to make sure that I am genuine in who I am, and I will ask parents how they're doing. I'll strike up conversations with them. When I have parents give me suggestions, I ultimately, if I think it's a good idea, I try to implement it as fast as I can as well. So I guess that's another way of doing it. And one of them is this same parent that wrote the letter. He was a former coach, and I was trying to teach the kids not to steal the ball from their own team. And he said, well, what I used at that age was that we don't steal from our friends. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So I changed it from don't steal from your team to don't steal from your friends, based on his recommendation.
Well, Clint, I saw a draft of the letter, and there was a phrase in there that I wanted to follow up on as we kind of get ready to get you out the door here. But your game time demeanor was described as being like a Zen master on the sideline. And I wonder, number one, what does that mean? And, what does that look like? But what's actually going on, for you? Are you really intentional about trying to manage your sideline demeanor, or how do you approach that in games?
Again, that was another thing that I read that I was extremely humbled by, and feel like it's something I could probably do better at. I tried to stay on script with things that we have talked about in the last 2 weeks with practice. I've even gone as far as tell the kids that they can. Today, I'm only allowed to talk to the defender, and I did that for actually like the last four games we played this last season with the two groups. So like two games each group. I told them I was only allowed to talk to the defender. If you hear me talking to anybody about the defender, you guys can tell me to shut up. And man, they thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And a few of them, Coach, you're not supposed to talk to me. I'm the right midfielder. And I'm like, all right, back to the defender. So I don't know how to answer your question other than I try to stay on topic. I try to remember that as much as it's fun to win, these kids are 8 and none of them are going to remember if they won this game or not in a year or two. And I try to remind myself that I can only focus on what's in front of me and what I can control. And so I don't get pulled into the other sideline freaking out over bad calls. I don't get, and I quietly remind our sideline, don't worry about it. Let them do what they're going to do.
If I could affirm just one thing you said there, again, coaching multiple age groups right now, the thing that really helps me on the sidelines, even in practice, and this is true for the varsity level as well, is just a reminder to myself, we haven't worked on that yet. So if a player botches the transition assignment, or there's something that they quote unquote should know at this age, but we haven't taught it or coached it or practiced it, that really narrows, my list of things that I'm going to give feedback on, or I'm going to pay a lot of attention to. And then we just gradually expand that list as it goes on. But I think there's a lot of peace of mind in that too, knowing that, well, they don't know it because we just haven't worked on it yet. And I think that gives kids peace of mind as well, that, we know we're going to have to, we just haven't done it yet, but coach is aware of it, but he's not getting after us for something that he hasn't coached us on, up to this point. So I would just encourage listeners. I think that's really powerful and helps to keep everybody sort of a little bit more calm on the sidelines and in practices as well.
I think I've heard you say that before, Nate, and that has been a big help for me.
Well, Clint, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast to share your experiences in your own leadership development, your work with SewLong, and lastly, just your work in youth soccer. And I think we're all looking forward to that one day book that you're going to be writing around youth sports coaching, because I know it would make a huge impact on a lot of other people out there.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. So as I was doing the edits for this episode, editing our conversation, I became deeply disappointed with my interviewing. Now, Nate and I always do in AAR after every interview, and we talk about how things could have been better, better questions to ask and stuff like that. But this negative feeling or disappointment wasn't so much about the questions I did or didn't ask. It was about what I didn't share. I regret in my conversation not sharing what my relationship with Clint has meant to me, not just to him. We've had an incredibly special friendship, and I guess honestly I didn't share because I'm not great at PDA, but public or podcast displays of affection. I just say this now, not for Clint, because Clint and I are very honest and about how much we appreciate each other. I say it because I just want to encourage every listener, everyone who's walking the leadership journey, to take the leap. Reach out to someone, ask for help, coaching, mentorship, guidance, whatever you want to call it. Be willing to say, hey, I need coaching, I need support, I need a sounding board. That's really, really important. And it's been transformational for me as a leader, and it's been transformational for people like Clint. If you want to learn more about our one-on-one coaching program, be sure to check out tocculture.com to learn more there, and you can also inquire into working with us. There's just a simple little form to fill